Empowerment and equality. The Quranic revolutionary shift in treating captive women. Source: The Revolutionary Ideas of a Strange Book. By Hamed Hosseini. Demystifying, Malakat Amen, the so-called slave girl. Is slavery recognized in the Quran? And does the Quran state that Muslim men can take slave women or concubines as their property, or marry them by force, even if these women are married to someone else? To answer this question, let's examine translations of verse 24 from Surah An-Nisa that addresses Muslim men with respect to the issue of marriage. Arabic original text reads: Quran 4:24. Daryabadi's translation. And also forbidden are the wedded among women, save those whom your right hands own. Pichthal's translation. And all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hands possess. As per Sahih International Translation. And also prohibited to you are all married women except those your right hands possess. According to Yusuf Ali's translation. Also prohibited are women already married, except those whom your right hands possess. From these translations, it is derived that slave women were brought into the ownership of Muslim men during early Islam. It is also implied that some of these women were married, and unlike free married women, for whom marriage is prohibited to men, marriage to these slave or captive women, even if they were married before their captivity, has been considered permissible. In some Muslim sects, believing in temporary marriage, or mut'a in Arabic, opens opportunities for religiously sanctioned sexual exploitation. The idea of the ownership of women, a concept most commentators have identified as referring to slave women, and the possibility of marrying them even if they were married prior to their captivity, are examples that have contributed to the belief that early Islam recognized the ownership of another human being, namely slavery. Regrettably, this is yet another systematically popularized distortion that has been introduced to the Quran by so-called experts in religion. This distortion results from ignorance or a lack of commitment to understanding the text and its history. The flaws in the translations are evident. The phrase, possessing by the right hand, is quite literally nonsensical. Very few Muslims or Arabic experts challenge such translations, and hardly anyone questions them. We, as educated Muslims within modernized secular education systems, have entrusted this task to irresponsible religious authorities and specialists, thereby distancing ourselves from the truth that the text could have imparted. This misinterpretation and exploitation of Quranic verses have had far-reaching consequences, particularly exemplified by extremist groups like ISIS. They have manipulated these ill-conceived notions to justify their heinous acts, such as the enslavement and abuse of women under the guise of religious authority. This grave misrepresentation not only tarnishes the essence of the Quran but also perpetuates harm to innocent lives. Such instances underscore the urgent need for a comprehensive and accurate understanding of the Quran, one that reflects its true teachings and dismisses the twisted interpretations that fuel extremism and oppression. Muslims and scholars alike must take a stand against such misappropriations to ensure that the Quran's message of justice, equality, and compassion prevails over the distortions of those who seek to exploit it for their own sinister agendas. On the other hand, the misinterpretations of Quranic verses regarding women have been maliciously exploited by orientalists and Islamophobes to paint Islam as a religion that condones and perpetuates the mistreatment of women. Such misinterpretations have been used to perpetuate harmful stereotypes, fueling prejudice and hostility towards Islam and Muslims. It is crucial to counter these misrepresentations and promote a more nuanced understanding of the Quran, rooted in its historical context and the overall message of equality and dignity for all individuals. While some verses may be challenging to understand, it is essential to interpret them within the framework of the Quran as a whole, which consistently promotes justice, compassion, and equality. Furthermore, the delegation of the understanding of faith sources solely to the clerical system can indeed perpetuate patriarchal and discriminatory attitudes. By doing so, Muslims, especially those who are educated, inadvertently lend credibility to both Islamophobes and extremists who exploit such interpretations to further their agendas. It is crucial for Muslims to take an active role in understanding their faith and seeking knowledge from various perspectives, including from qualified scholars and researchers, to counter misinterpretations and foster a more inclusive and enlightened understanding of Islam. The democratization of faith should be on the agenda. Returning to the verse under question, the translators and commentators have translated the phrase, mulk-e-yamin, or malakat-aman, to mean ownership and possession of one human by another human, while anyone with basic knowledge of Arabic understands that if the Quran intended to say, women whom you own, it would have used ma maliktam. However, when the word aman, the plural of yamin, is employed, there is undoubtedly a reason. Aman is the plural of yamin, which means right hands. But if we translate the text literally, we quickly realize that what is possessed by your right hands doesn't make sense. Therefore, the translators and interpreters have decided to assume that it means that which you possess, and thus disregard the word yamin. But why such a mistake? Because in the prevailing culture, from the time of the Arab empires of the Umayyads and Abbasids to the present day, there has been a widespread belief in the permissibility of slavery. As a result, this cultural perspective has been imposed on the interpretation of the text. Islam, which initially emerged as an emancipatory and anti-aristocracy movement, underwent a transformation into a formal religion of empire building. As it grew in power and influence, the dynamics of emerging power relations demanded the incorporation of subjugative, sexist, and domineering discourses to gain popularity and maintain control. This shift in focus led to the reinterpretation of certain Quranic verses to fit the prevailing socio-political context. Scholars, many of whom were closely associated with or served imperial courts, played a significant role in shaping and popularizing these revised interpretations. In order to align with the interests of the ruling elite and to solidify their position, they reinforced notions of male dominance and control over women, drawing upon existing patriarchal norms. This distortion of the Quranic message not only perpetuated gender inequalities but also served the purpose of consolidating power within the expanding Islamic empires. The transition from an egalitarian ethos to a more hierarchical and oppressive structure within certain segments of Islamic societies underscores the complex interplay between religious teachings, political agendas, and societal norms. It highlights how the original spirit of justice and equality championed by Islam was, in some instances, overshadowed by the pursuit of power and authority, leading to the propagation of distorted interpretations that continue to shape perceptions today. In the case of these verses, when the word yamin is combined with another word like mulk, it no longer conveys the meaning of right hand. Instead, it signifies custodianship or guardianship. Just like many other words that have different meanings in various contexts, here too, yamin doesn't mean physical right hand. For example, if someone in English uses the idiom, slipping something through hands, it most likely means that control over something was lost. There are countless examples of the usage of the word yamin in Arabic to mean commitment. It would not have been difficult if they wanted to understand it correctly. Huwa indana bel yamin. This means, he is esteemed by us, commitment to esteeming someone, not that he is on our right-hand side. Yamin nul law. This means, I swear by Allah, or, I take an oath by Allah, meaning a commitment to honesty. Yamin al-Gaza. This refers to an oath or commitment made to speak the truth during judgment or testimony. Mulk-e-yamin. This refers to what or whom you have taken responsibility for. You have committed to it. The word, yamin, here also conveys the meaning of commitment. Perhaps the reason for using the word, yamin, is that when someone gives a commitment to another, they often extend their right hand for a handshake. Since mulk-e-yamin doesn't mean ownership or possession, but rather guardianship, it follows that ma malakat aman does not imply slave women or married servant women. Sanctioning marriage with married or engaged women would have led to permitting adultery. Commentators and translators, due to their lack of commitment to the emancipatory spirit of the Quran and a deficiency in historical knowledge, irresponsibly employ the term slave in their translations. They fail to discern the distinction made intentionally by the early Muslims between a slave, abid in Arabic, and a war captive. Furthermore, they remain unaware that the original Islamic movement not only imposed a theological prohibition on slavery but also put forth social measures for its eradication. Early Muslims became involved in buying slaves from their owners and setting them free. Islam advocated for the structural reform that could lead to the full emancipation of slaves through the implementation of laws aimed at establishing equality among all individuals. These efforts were driven by the vision of fostering a just society, ultimately seeking the complete elimination of the institution of slavery. Slavery functioned as a major economic system within ancient empires, often established through extensive wars, conquests, organized networks of human trafficking, and the utilization of captives as unpaid labor in fields and cities. This production model reached its zenith during the expansion of European colonial empires, fueled by new technologies such as advanced navigation, war machinery like cannons and firearms, and the acquisition of vast lands in the Americas suitable for agriculture. Countless millions of African and indigenous people were enslaved, displaced, and bought and sold in the Western slave markets. This phenomenon became so widespread that even ancient empires seemed to turn pale in comparison. However, in the Arabian Peninsula, slavery primarily emerged from intertribal conflicts, where captives who weren't exchanged or returned, slaves acquired by Arab aristocratic merchants during travels to Persian, Roman, or Egyptian empires, or those presented as gifts, were put to work on farms or in households. They lived under the ownership of their masters. During the initial years of Islam, in the first 13 years in Mecca when Muslims constituted a minority, they were not engaged in any warfare that would have raised the issue of captives. In its early proclamation of the equality of all individuals, regardless of social class, gender, or ethnicity, Islam took special care to address the needs of slaves, the impoverished, women, youth, the homeless, and the marginalized. This starkly contrasted with the prevailing aristocracy, where the male ruler, who owned household slaves, regarded women, except those of the elite, as inferior. The new religion, on the other hand, held great esteem for the downtrodden, women, slaves, youth, the unlearned, and the lower classes. In the early days of Islam, while Muslims in Mecca were suppressed as a minority, they sought to grant freedom to the slaves under their ownership. They considered the manumission of slaves, who were often under the possession of the Meccan aristocracy, as part of their religious atonement or as a form of religious charity. The term, fakir raqaba, commonly translated as freeing a slave, is explicitly mentioned in Surah Al-Balad in the Qur'an, and it also appears as a form of expiation for missed obligations in Surah Al-Baqarah. After the migration to the city of Medina and the establishment of their first community, Muslims faced attacks from their enemies. As a result, the issue of war captives came to the forefront, raising questions about their fate. The Quranic verses explicitly instructed them to either free captives, with or without ransom, or exchange them, chapter 47, verse 4. However, a portion of captives often remained in their custody. Most of these captives, though not all, were women who participated in battles, either to provide sexual services to men or to encourage men to fight in the enemy ranks. Moreover, the Arab aristocracy and leaders would also bring their concubines along, who, in the event of defeat, would fall into the hands of the Muslims along with other spoils of war. Many of these women were not open to negotiation or exchange by the enemy, and their abandonment could result in their homelessness. The remaining and unexchanged captives, especially women whose owners or husbands were from the enemies of Muslims, were distributed among those Muslims who could afford to accommodate them. Creating detention centers or camps to hold them would have indeed imposed substantial costs on the Muslim community. Some families and individuals took on the responsibility of providing them with shelter, food, and clothing in exchange for their labor if they were physically capable. The average Muslim community member, especially the Meccan immigrants in Medina, did not possess significant financial resources, and in most cases, the living conditions of these captives did not differ significantly from those of the weaker segments of the Muslim society. In the Quranic verse under question, the possibility of marriage with these captives is introduced for men who lacked the financial means for marriage according to prevailing customs. This was intended to gradually integrate these women into the community, allowing them to lead normal life and ensuring they would not be subjected to harassment, degradation, or sexual exploitation. Subsequently, the Quran establishes the legal and ethical conditions for permanent marriage with them. This is where one can observe the meticulous legal and ethical considerations of the Quran regarding the dignity and respect of captive women. It is one of the most progressive approaches towards dealing with captives in the pre-modern era, which, unfortunately, is not yet widely witnessed in the so-called modernized world of the 21st century. The conditions for marriage with these women for those who lack the financial capability to marry free women are outlined in the next verse, 24-25. These women must willingly embrace Islam and their declaration of faith should not be doubted. The verse emphasizes entrusting this matter to God, who knows best the extent of their faith. This way they could have also gained autonomy to formally divorce themselves from those who abandoned them, under the Islamic law. The second condition involves seeking consent from the kinship of the captive women under guardianship. This underscores the importance of seeking consent even in cases where these women have been abandoned by their husbands or owners, resulting in a breach of their marital boundaries in the case of married ones. It also highlights the necessity for coordination with those who were responsible for their care. Compare this with the treatment of women in the wars of the 20th and 21st centuries, and you will find the radically progressive approach upheld by the Qur'an over 1400 years ago. In the third condition, the Qur'an emphasizes that the compensation for these women, including the mahr or bridal gift, financial support, and other obligations that the Sharia places on the husband, should be provided in a suitable, customary, and dignified manner, proportionate to their human dignity. Even though due to poverty, the compensation for men unable to afford marriage with free women may be lesser, neither the poverty of the man nor the captivity of the woman should lead to disrespect for the woman. The verse states, "And give them their due compensation in a fair manner." The fourth condition set by the Quran is that women under guardianship should be treated with respect, innocence, and dignity, without viewing them as less human, especially due to their past circumstances, and particularly refraining from stigmatizing their involvement in wars as a means to incite men towards battle. The verse emphasizes, "Treat them as chaste women who are not promiscuous." In the fifth condition, the Quran instructs that men should not engage in temporary romantic relationships with these women. Rather, their relationship should mirror that of marriage with free women, aiming for stability, unless unavoidable differences or difficulties arise. The verse even considers the possibility that these women may return to their past or commit a crime. Interestingly, while the Quran has treated them equally with free women until this point, in the case of indecency, it instructs that their punishment should be reduced. This means that the Quran takes into account the previous factors in these women's lives that could lead to criminal behavior, such as inappropriate behaviors and traumas that were beyond their control and shaped their personalities. The verse says, "But if they should return to moral compliance, then upon them is half the penalty for free women." In this verse, we witness the most ethical human relationship and a politics of care described in the Quran, as part of Islamic moral codes for conflict, during historical times when there was little development regarding respect for the rights of women and the prisoners of war. A more accurate and realistic translation of these verses would then be as follows. Verse 24 of chapter 4, speaking to Muslim men. "And also married, engaged women are forbidden to you, except those captive women who are under your care and responsibility. Allah has made this known to you explicitly, and apart from these situations, marriage with any free, unmarried woman is allowed, provided that you seek their consent through proper marriage proposals to prevent engaging in mere sexual relations, fa-sha, with them. And as you benefit from your life with them, it is a compulsory obligation to provide them with their due dowries and compensations. It is not wrong to show them additional kindness and benefits beyond your obligation, for Allah is all-knowing, all-wise." Then verse 25 continues to say, "And whoever among you cannot afford to marry free, believing women, then marry from those under your custody, the believing captive women. Allah is aware of your faith. You shall marry them with their consent, seeking proper marital arrangements, to prevent engaging in mere sexual relations with them. And if you benefit from your life with them, then provide them with their due dowries and compensations according to your means. Do not engage in illicit relationships with them. Rather establish a respectful and consensual bond. And when you marry them, if any of them commit indecency, their punishment will be half of that for free women who commit the same indecency. This permission for marrying captive women is for those among you who fear committing sins due to financial constraints in marrying free women. But if you can be patient and wait until you can afford it, it would be better for you. Allah is forgiving and merciful." It is obvious that the Quran seeks to regulate and improve the treatment of war captives, especially the females, beyond the prevailing social norms of its time, leading to a significantly more ethical and just society. In conclusion, the Quran promotes human rights, dignity, and compassion, even in challenging historical circumstances. The Quranic approach to marriage with captive women reflects a progressive and humane attitude, striving to elevate the treatment of the most disempowered in society.